Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Hey there guys, here we go. We're getting towards the end of our set review videos here for the Modern Horizons 2 set. And today we are on the last one, but there is another video coming out that is related to Modern Horizons 2, which is the reprints. I'm not sure exactly when that's coming out, but it's coming out fairly soon. It's just looking at the valuable reprint cards that are in the set. But anyway, we're getting into this last video here today. This is multicolored and colourless cards. So we're going to kick it off with Dakon, Shadow's Slayer. He's all the Esper colours, so a white, a blue, and a black. Zero loyalty planeswalker rather. He enters the battlefield with a number of loyalty counters on him equal to the number of lands you control. So that's quite interesting, you know. For our format, if you cast, the later you cast him, the better he is. Ticks up to Surveil 2. You know, Surveil, it's okay. It's not that great. Ticks down from neg 3. So what his starting loyalty theoretically would be if you just had 3 lands to cast him naturally. You can exile a target creature. So this is a sorcery speed exile based effect. So that's, you know, Vindicate is a card, you know, and exile is pretty good, but a sorcery speed exile, I'm not too hot on that. And again, like when you're looking at planeswalkers, I always think you really need to look at the tick up and the tick down as the main things that this is going to do, because unless you're in a very specific deck, you're not going to get the ult. But when you get the ult, what do you get? Neg 6, you may put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. So you can sneak attack-esque in something from your hand or graveyard, but it sticks around. So, I don't know. There are things that maybe you can do with this. You probably want to be in a very artifact-heavy deck. Now, if this was all artifacts, it would be absurdly good. Or if it was even 1 or 2 artifacts, it would be pretty darn good. Even it's kind of Duretti-esque, it's still okay, I guess. But as its ult, that just seems really quite bad. You know, not amazingly good. Just very, very, very underwhelming. So what decks want this? This is where I'm at. Besides, like, just artifact decks, but even then, it's just like, well, what are you actually going to do with this thing? And that's the thing, like, some of these cards, I've tried to trim some of the ones that I don't think have much place in our format for the most part, but this one, it's just kind of like, it's hard to say that it won't see any play, because I'm sure some people will try to play it. But it's just like, well, what's it actually doing, and what success level can it have? That's just the thing. And maybe that's just the thing. Maybe it's just one of these cards that people throw into decks and are like, well, it's in there and I have this card. And, you know, again, that whole, you know, mentality of, well, it does something that I want to do. You know, I want to cheat in this artifact, or I want to cheat back this artifact from my graveyard or whatever, and I'm in these colors. So it just does what I roughly want. It maybe will get there one of these days, who knows. And just surveilling 2 every other turn or whatnot, if it survives, just okay. And it's not that threatening of a planeswalker, really, and I don't think you need to worry about its ult. I don't really think its ult is winning the game too much. So maybe it will see a little bit more out there, but I'm just kind of a little bit low on Dakon. I'm also a little bit low on the next planeswalker. Greydrome? Dihada? Is that how you pronounce it? I'm Gihadrome. I'm not sure. 1 and a Grixis, so a blue, a black, and red. it has protection from permanents with corruption counters on. So 4 mana, 4 loyalty isn't bad, and you tick up, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life, you put a corruption counter on to one other target creature or planeswalker. The rest of the text here, like each opponent loses life, you gain 2 life, that's pretty whatever, in my opinion. If it actually didn't have this text and it said you can put a corruption counter on up to 2 target or even 4 target creatures, I still don't think that would be very good for our format. I understand that this card was printed for modern purposes, but now we've got to look at it for our purposes in EDH. So where does this fit? I think it does protect itself to a more minor degree, and it can protect itself also from planeswalkers, which is kind of a little bit weird, but if somebody has their Ugin out, you can just put a corruption counter on their Ugin, and their Ugin can't snipe your Geodrome Dahada. So that's a thing. Neg 3, you gain control of target creature or planeswalker until end of turn, and put a corruption counter on it. It gains haste until end of turn. So gaining control of one creature, like a threaten style effect or whatever, that sort of style effect, where you gain control of a creature, that's not terrible. But on a planeswalker, yeah, sure, you can do it multiple times if it sticks around. But you're immediately ticking down just to steal a creature. Unless you're really in a stealing deck, I don't really see this as doing that much. And again, every time I'll say this, you've got to look at the tick up and the tick down and say, is it worth it based on this? Because again, you're not going to get the ult very many times. But then if you do, what does the ult do? You gain control each permanent with a corruption counter on it. Now, that's actually pretty darn good. And this is why I say that, the losing life, gaining life, whatnot, all that stuff is pretty irrelevant. If it said you may choose 2 targets or whatever to put corruption counters on, that wouldn't be too bad, because then at least it has protection from probably the 2 biggest creatures on the battlefield, and then you can just keep ticking it up, keep protecting it, hopefully until you can maybe get to the neg 7. It just being I can't really protect myself too effectively because you've got 3 opponents in our format, so for the most part. So again, the first player whose thing has a corruption counter on it goes, oh well, I can't attack it, I guess someone else better attack it or whatnot, and then somebody else attacks it and probably kills it. So it's well, so much for that. I put a corruption counter on it and made everyone lose 2 life, and I gained 2 life for 4 mana. How good was that? That's what I mean. Where does this fit? And maybe it fits in some sort of Grixis control build, but I don't know how good it is in that, because unless you can really, really, really protect it, I would just be well, it doesn't do very much for you. Gaining control of all the things, yeah, cool. If you've got things that, can get it there quicker, it will be good. But again, it's kind of hard to find decks that are focused around, getting there that aren't in green, because doubling season and whatnot, and, foreign collects are the better cards to utilize. And most of the good cards that help you tick up even further are on green cards. So I just don't know where you can find a everything but white, maybe planeswalker deck, I don't know, but again, or maybe 5 color, I don't know, but again, just I don't know, it just seems like it's a very slow process to get anywhere to do anything too relevant. Next up, Master of Death. He's a zombie wizard for 3. 1 generic, blue, and a black. 3/1. When he ETBs with Surveil 2 at the beginning of the upkeep, if he's in our graveyard, We may pay 1 life. If we do, we can return him to our hand. So we can recur him pretty darn easily. You know, paying 1 life to get him back to our hand is not like the best thing to do, but if we haven't got anything else going on, maybe it's alright. It's kind of drawing another card, essentially. So that's okay. He's a 3/1. But again, he's a zombie. So there are other ways to augment and buff his power. So, you know, that isn't too bad. Getting that surveil when he enters, he is somewhat repeatable in a sense because, again, at the beginning of upkeep, you can return him to your hand, so you can keep getting that surveil. Now, I would think I'd want to sort of run this in a deck where I can sacrifice it every single other turn or whatnot. So before my turn, I sacrifice it, get it back, you know, or if I have the thing that gives me extra upkeeps, I can just sack him in response to my second upkeep, get it back to my hand again, play it again somehow, sack it again, whatnot, so that you can keep getting value out of the surveyor or whatnot. Do these sorts of things so that, you know, you can churn through your deck and find the pieces that you need to kill people and win the game. So I don't think it's that bad. I think it's a lot better than than the last 2 cards, but I do think it is a very heavy build around. But certainly zombies are heavy into that theme, and black certainly is heavy into the graveyard stroke sacrifice theme. So I wouldn't be surprised if it would work, and if some people can find a place for it. Because even in the zombie deck that's Esper Colors, I can't remember her name, and I think it's pretty hard to pronounce anyway, but again, even in that deck, you discard it or whatnot, you put it in the graveyard, then you get it back to your hand and whatnot, so that's pretty good, or mill it, whatever, and then you get it back to your hand, and then you surveil too, you can keep seeing what's on top, you can know whether you want to discard cards or mill cards or whatnot, and whatnot, from there, make decisions. Maybe this is pretty good in a couple other decks that I have as well. So I might even think about it for my Sidisi deck and whatnot. But my Sidisi deck is pretty fat at the moment, so I don't know where I'm going to put it. But again, you can always think about it in certain decks. So that's the way that those go. And you always want to think about, well, will this fit for my deck? I don't know. It's always an option. Next one, Moderation. A 3-mana enchantment, 1 blue and a white. You can't cast more than one spell each turn. Whenever you cast a spell, you draw a card. So I see this as strictly a blue-white control style spell. If you're a blue-white control deck, I think you need to run all these effects that say players can only cast 1 spell per turn. Therefore, you're just like, okay, what I'm going to do is like, especially like if you've got things like Tower End and things like this, where you're just going to generate drakes and whatnot, or murmuring mystic, things like this. You're just generating birds and whatnot, or you're just generating some other value by drawing cards and whatnot from other effects. I think those are really good. What you want to do is have ways to have your most of your mana untapped during your opponent's turns, basically counter their 1 spell per turn because they'll only be able to play 1 spell per turn. Then you've cast your spell per turn, you can draw a couple cards off of it, keep the gas flowing, keep the cards coming. They're down cards, they can't play the game and whatnot. It's an annoying and really bad card in that regard, and I think it maybe only sees play in certain higher, more powerful metas, but then again, it's kind of like, well, by that time, you know, that you actually get these things together with this sort of card, I don't think it does enough, so it's just like, well, it's a bit too slow. Unless you're playing all the stacks, I don't know how good it is in that regard, in those formats. But it's still, I think, if you're in those control style decks and you just want to accumulate value on all your instants and whatnot, that this is a card that you might want to look at putting into your deck. Next, Priest of Fell Rites. So a black and a white 2/2. You tap it, pay 3 life, sacrifice the priest, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can only activate it as a sorcery, but it has unearth for 3 and white and black. So, it has haste when you unearth it, so you can immediately get something from your graveyard back to the battlefield, for 5 mana and 3 life. Those aren't too bad of abilities. Stapled onto this thing, which is a creature which can return itself pretty easily to the battlefield. You just get your best thing back to the battlefield, or one of your other things that can get your best thing, or your second best thing, or third best thing, and just keep getting things back from the graveyard. You can't easily abuse this too much, but there might be ways that you can do it. But still, I would think that this is a really good effect for black-white stroke Abzan style shells that want to reanimate stuff from their graveyard. I still think it's a pretty decent card, even though it doesn't have haste when you just cast it naturally. Even though 2 mana isn't a lot for an investment that much, but one whole turn cycle is to a degree. So I would really want to see running Swiftfoot Boots along with this if you're just casting it naturally. Otherwise, I think you really want to unearth this thing. You really want it in your graveyard so you can unearth it. Having to wait till you have 5 mana is much better than having to wait till you can maybe untap with this and then do the thing. If you do the thing with it early on, you're probably not going to get anything really good with it anyway, so I don't think that that's too relevant. I think you need to wait till you have 5 mana probably anyway for this to stag anything really decent. But I still think it's a really quite good card. It can be good early, maybe depends if you're dredging or milling cards or whatnot, or you're actively discarding your own hand, whatnot, things like this. But there are things that you could do with this in the format. So I do think that this can see play in Carador decks and whatnot. So I would definitely consider running it if you're a deck that's like that and you're not into sort of CDH power levels, because I don't think that this would see play there, because again, you really need your cards to be high impact and do something now, sort of thing. All right. I want to talk about Arcbound Shukai for a second. 1 red and white, first striker, ETBs with modular 2. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each other artifact creature you control. This can do some good stuff with some artifact-based decks. So if you're in a Boros artifact style deck, what's her name? Malibu or whatever her name is, this can be quite a good little guy for you that sort of helps your other guys out. And when he dies, you can put some counters on something. So, he puts a whole bunch of counters on your stuff, and whatnot. So it's only a 2/2, really, but, just putting a counter on each other artifact creature you control, that can add quite a lot of power, and that can be really good in those go wide artifact style decks. So again, maybe some Breya decks, if you're not CDH again. But again, if you're just I'm going to put a whole bunch of artifacts into play and punch people with artifacts, this might be a good option, just to put a whole bunch of counters on a whole bunch of things that you've got. If you have a whole bunch of Thopters sitting around, if you can reanimate this, get it back. There are certainly ways that you can get it back. Certainly Osgear as well, can exile it, make 2 copies of it, things like that. So your creatures now get 2 +1/+1 counters and, whatnot. So that's pretty darn good. So I would think about it in those decks. Another card here that's another artifact-based card, Est Warden Sphinx. 7 and a white and a blue, 4/4, has affinity, flying, and cascade. I think this is pretty darn good in some artifact decks. Again, probably not CDH, but again, like if you're like just like looking to get some value out of your artifact deck, you're probably going to hit a bad mana rock most of the time or whatever, something like that. But it's still, again, for the most part, you want to find additional value with your stuff, and even if you get something else out of it, if you get a 2 mana rock, off this thing that cost you 2 mana, well, it basically cost you 0 mana then, like, again, like if you've got ways to set up the top of your deck and fiddle with that and whatnot, I would definitely consider thinking about this as well. There's some other commanders that maybe can go and utilize this that naturally just happen to have artifacts because they're not in green and whatnot, so they need artifacts to actually have mana and whatnot. You can even run some of the artifact lands, even the artifact dual lands and whatnot, and that will help power this out in some of those decks. So certainly I would think about running it in some of those decks. Next one, a Grateful Restoration. Sorcery, 3 and white black, so 5 mana total. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, there's lots of things that you can do with this. There's a few combos that you can do with this that I know about, like Karmic Guide, Revelark, whatnot. Things like that. So this is just a good value card, like in these colors. You can get one of your better creatures back from the graveyard with an additional counter on. That's pretty good. You can get 2 of your smaller utility creatures back from the graveyard to the battlefield. That's very useful, especially like when you're trying to re-establish yourself and whatnot. So I think that this is another card that if you're in Orzhov and you're not a super heavy creature deck, but you want to get back some of your creatures, like you're not Carador, because Carador wants 100% or nearly 90% creatures. But if you're a creature-based deck that, can utilize a spell like this, I think it can be really good. There are certainly some loops with Eternal Witness and whatnot, Tireless Witness as well, that you can do with this. So you just get this back and keep reusing it and keep recasting your stuff and whatnot. And you can get some really good things, like I said, Revelark and Karmic Guide. So those can just like win you the game somewhat. And some things that sort of, have no power in the graveyard, but when they come onto the battlefield, they have more power. So, there's a lot of things like that that will be able to be hit and snagged and whatnot, but suddenly now you've got a 4/4 or a 5/5 or whatever else. Plus you have other synergies in your deck. You're not just going to have like this do nothing else with something else on the battlefield. So I would definitely consider it for certain decks that care about creatures but aren't like Carador sort of style decks where you're actively trying to mill your stealth. Next, Drykeeper. I want to talk about this like for a couple seconds. This is an Elf Druid, 2/2 for 5, so 3 and a green and a black. When you ETBs, we create 2 Squirrel Boys, and then we can pay 3 and a black. And squirrels we control get +1/+0 and gain Menace or Menace until end of turn. Look at those squirrels. Look how evil they look and how they're going to kill us all. The squirrels! But yes, this is another great squirrel card. This is just funny to me and whatnot. But again, this is an actually decent and good effect. If you want to go down this route of having squirrels in your deck, you need ways to get your squirrels in there, and your squirrels need to punch people. They can't just hit for 1. That's not going to be good enough. Even hitting for 2 isn't amazingly great, but that is a lot better. But certainly Menace is pretty good. Not the greatest ever, but still it's something. And, 4 mana isn't chump change, but when you've got nothing else going on, or you're really reliant on keeping your board going and whatnot until the point at which it's gone, you might as well not sort of dedicate more things to the board than are totally necessary. So you should just keep your critical mass sort of thing going until your critical mass falls over, essentially. So that's the way I look at a lot of these cards. When you think about them, you think, well, why would you not just keep playing squirrels? Because, well, a board wipe can happen at any time or whatnot. So or someone can make some bad blocks for you or something. Suddenly somebody's got something else that you didn't know about in their hand and whatnot, and then suddenly all your work goes out the window. So you just kind of like, well, you need these things on these things like mana sinks and whatnot, so that you can go, okay, I have something on board to do that's not adding to my board anymore, but it affects my board. So, it won't be lost. If I lose it, it won't mean I've lost the cards in my hand. I won't have overcommitted things and whatnot, because that's the main problem with a lot of these decks, is especially these low to the ground sort of aggro decks for the most part, is that if you overextend, you can't go any further afterwards because you just haven't got enough card advantage and whatnot to go along with it. So again, I think it's a really good effect, even if you're not like super high on squirrels. I think just those 2 extra squirrels that this guy makes, and then giving those squirrels +1/+0 and menace, still pretty okay, and can do some stuff. But unfortunately, you can't get menace. There are some cards that give you additional menace, essentially, so you can not be blocked by 3 things, but, you can't give them menace, essentially, with this, which is a bit sad. Next, Goblin Archaeomancer. One green and 1 red. Each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. He's a 2/2. Okay, so goblins, storm, and a few other things exist. So I would think if you're in Wart the Raid Mother style of decks and you want to have a essentially goblin electromancer in that deck for your spells that you're trying to storm off with and things like this and whatnot, that this is the perfect card for you. Now, I don't think it goes in many other decks. Maybe some Teamer Spellslinger decks. Maybe it can join its best friend, Goblin Electromancer, in those decks as well. So you have even more Goblin Electromancers, and redundancy is pretty good. So this is a good card for those decks. But otherwise, I don't think that it does very much and see much play. It is a Goblin Shaman, but I don't know whether that's doing very much. There's not that much other shaman-y sort of stuff that sort of synergizes with it. So I don't know, maybe there is some deck that I'm not aware of, but I don't really think that there's many. But again, certainly if you're in those Spellslingery, Gruul, Teamer style decks, I would think about it. The ignoblest of hierarchs is next. 1 mana, 0/1 with Exalted, and you can tap to add a green, black, or a red. So this is Jund's Noble Hierarch. Look, this is probably pretty good in Modern as well, because it's a 1 mana shifted colors Noble Hierarch. So we all know that Noble Hierarch in Modern is pretty darn good. So I think this is going to be pretty darn good in Modern as well. But even if that is the case, I still think it's pretty good in our format too. Cards can be good in both. This is the thing that some people forget. This can do good stuff because you want 1 mana mana dorks. 1 mana mana dorks are very good. The upside of this being able to tap for most of your colors if you're in Jund, or if you're in Jund plus, let's say, higher than Jund, maybe 5 colors, I don't know. But again, just being able to tap for 3 different colors of mana, it's pretty good. Being a 1-drop, very cheap. Again, if it dies later on or whatnot, you don't really care, because at that point you will get your card advantage out of it somewhere, somehow, can recur it, do other things, whatnot. Exalted, especially if you are in a Voltron style deck, I think that that's very relevant. These colors don't really have much exalted, so I would definitely think about running it if you're in a Voltron based commander deck that's in those colors. I don't know any off the top of my head, but I know that there are some that are out there, or some that people run as Voltron commanders. So I would definitely think about it. I would definitely also think about it in like 4 and 5 color decks and whatnot. Just as another 1 mana dork, like it's a really good 1 mana dork. It'll fix you for most of your colors, especially if you're in Jund. And even if you're not in Voltron, I still think that you can run this. Even like Corville might want this, because he can sack it, still have the exalted, and still hit people harder and whatnot. So that can win games. So I still think it's really quite good and can do a lot of stuff. So, think about it if you are in those decks. Last one, Damn. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. That's just for 2 black mana at sorcery speed. But you can overload it for 2 and double white, and then it's a Wrath of God, essentially. So that is a really quite good effect. Now, sorcery speed kill spell isn't good. It isn't good. 2 mana to kill a thing at sorcery speed is not good. It's just okay. It is unconditional, which is good. It can't be regenerated. That's meh text to me. That's not that relevant, even on the Wrath. But the fact that this is a Wrath on the overload side is much, much, much better. This makes, the first half of the card being, it's maybe okay, not that great, to being like, wow, this card is amazingly good. Having this flexibility to be able to be like, okay, I really need to kill this specific one thing that this one opponent has, and I only have 2 mana available. Okay, I'm going to snipe it with this. I've gotten rid of the problem. Yes, not great that it's sorcery speed. I would rather at instant speed, of course. But the flexibility, again, what if I'm facing somebody else who's got this go wide tokens deck or whatnot, or they've just loaded the ground goblins or whatnot? Suddenly I need the Wrath more than I need the one, to kill one thing. Yeah, sure, they've got Cranko and they're going to make a million more goblins, but I need to kill the million goblins just to get rid of them. I need to kill Cranko, but I also need to kill the goblins as well, because if I don't kill them all together, I'm just going to get run over by goblins. So, this is a very flexible card, and I think it will see a lot of play in a lot of these Orzhov decks. Like if you're Orzhov Plus, I would think about running it very highly. I'm thinking about running it very highly, even in like my 4-color deck and whatnot, because this is a very powerful effect. It might even replace some of the board wipes that I've been fairly attached to. I haven't really liked Wrath of God that much because it's not very flexible. Again, it doesn't really do much. But when you can kill spell one thing, and then later on or whatnot, or even at the same time, you can still Wrath, most of the Wraths that you want don't affect you, or you want the Wraths that do affect you to be as cheap as humanly possible, and you want as much flexibility as that you can. So I think that this is a really great spell, and I really think that it will see a lot of play. Anyway, that is all we've got for multicolored stuff. There isn't much in artifacts, but we are going to get into having a quick look at what's in the artifact slots. So first off, we've got Cauldron Complete, 7 mana for a artifact equipment. So equips for 7, has living weapon, has indestructible. Equipped creature gets +5/+5. Has first strike, trample, indestructible, haste. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature. Toma! They've done it for you, buddy. They've made Cauldron complete. They're sick of you and your garbage and trying to get all the pieces out and together and to pay 400 million mana and all this stuff, whatnot, yada yada yada. So they've made this card for you, buddy, so that you don't have to go through all of that stuff and get a friggin' buff on your friggin' creature like this, man. Oh my god. Finally, you'll be able to get that Cauldron out somewhat decently, but anyway, keep them. I think some people want to keep the meme alive, but I think that this is just straight up the card that you should play if you actually want to try to do this whole Cauldron thing that this card, refers to. So yeah, like, I think that this is quite a good equipment and can go in a few decks. Certainly if you're caring about equipments and whatnot, I think it's pretty good. Like 7 mana and you get a 5/5 haste, first strike, trample, indestructible, and it's indestructible, and then if somebody goes to block it, you just exile their creature. So it's probably getting in unless somebody has just like a useless like mana dork or something poopy sitting around for the most part, but it's a 5/5 with trample, so it's just like, well, they want to block this darn thing for the most part, but then again, it's there. It doesn't do anything else unless you've got other things on it, but then again, that's not going to be hard in an equipment deck. So, in an equipment deck, I can see that this can see a lot of play and be very, very good. I think that this, again, just like, don't even bother with all the other pieces, in my opinion. Just like play this. Like, play this one thing. Even like paying 7 mana, like, you're probably never going to equip for 7 mana, so you want other ways to equip it. But like, if it's real late game, maybe it will. It's hard to say, but it's certainly still there, so it is quote unquote relevant text to a degree. So I would definitely remember that you can keep putting it, you can put it onto your best thing or a better thing, because that's the thing. You want to put it on your best thing or the thing that you actually want to kill people with, especially if you're in Voltron and whatnot. So again, I would just like run this one thing instead of running 3 other things. Yeah, sure, maybe you've got to find 2 more spots to put something else in, but that's not very hard. There's so many other great things that you can put into an equipment deck, and I think this just replacing, 2 other cards for you means that you've got more slots for more things that you probably wouldn't have been able to have before. So I think it's really good and can go in a lot of those decks, but otherwise I don't think it can see much play. But some people might want to run it just for the memes or whatnot. But anyway, it is what it is, and I think it's definitely a good card, so it definitely can see play. Next, Cyan of the Draco, 12 mana, 4/4, but has interesting ability, Domain. This spell costs 2 less for each basic land type among lands you control. It has flying, and each creature you control that has a color basically gets a keyword. So if it's white, it gets vigilance. If it's blue, it has hexproof. If it's black, it has lifelink. If it's red, it has first strike. If it's green, it has trample. So I really think that you should run this in 5-color, because then in 5-color, this costs, a shit ton less. A literal, this costs for, basically nothing. Really a lot less. So for 2 mana, getting a 4/4 is ridiculous. Flyer is ridiculous. And then just giving all your stuff that has a color, all a keyword, even if it's just one keyword, yeah, sure, who cares? If you're multicolor, if you have all these dragons that are 4 or 5 colors or whatnot, or even 3 colors, they're getting all of the abilities combined that their colors contain. So those are really good things. Yeah, sure, maybe it's just a dragons deck, but again, even in multicolored legendaries or something like that, I still think it's really good. Just giving all of your creatures all these different abilities coming down for just 2 mana is just really quite good. And again, I would only probably run it in maybe 4 or 5 color decks, because again, you want to reduce this thing down so that you can cast it for at least a roughly decent amount, and then get it out onto the battlefield and then start punching through with your stuff that has extra keywords now. And again, if you have something like Odric and whatnot, you can share all your keywords, and especially things like the new Chroma. Yeah, Chroma, that's it. She gives buffs to all the things that have keywords. So if you have these things out together, they work really well together, and you'll just kill people with this sort of thing. So I think it's really good, and I think you should look at putting it into some of your 4 and 5 color decks, especially if you care about dragons, or if you care about artifacts, maybe whatnot. Especially if you're not CDH, I guess so. But yeah, definitely a good card. Sword of Hearth and Home. So 3 mana to cast, 2 to equip. Creature gets +2/+2, has protection from green and white. Whenever it deals, the creature that is equipped to deals combat damage to a player, you flicker a creature, then you search your library for a basic land, then you put both the cards back onto the battlefield under your control, then you shuffle your library. This is really good. This might be red and white and almost all the other colors but green probably answer to needing more things that ramp you. This is great. This is another Sword of the Animist style effect. So this is really good. Yes, sure, it's 1 more mana to cast and that, but it gives you more evasion. Yes, sure, you've still actually got to hit with it, but again, it gives you that evasion which you need to be able to hit with. So I really think that this is good. Its upside is if you're in a flicker deck, you just want to flicker your creatures and get value off of them so that you can have re-enter the battlefield triggers, whatnot, these sorts of things. So equipping it to something that is even more evasive, that has flying or trample or whatnot, these other effects, is even better, or has menace, even that is still okay. So then some opponents just can't straight block this. If you're facing somebody who's white-green, they straight can't block you. If you're playing somebody who plays mostly green, most of their green stuff that can kill your thing probably can't block them. The rest of their stuff probably is too small to kill it. And then, not many people play that much white, but again, there are some people that try to jam Boros or try to jam white and whatnot. In some decks, most of the white stuff that you see is removal and whatnot, but you do see some things that happen to have white in their cost, so that can be relevant too. When you forget, oh yes, this happens to be a white creature. I forgot about that. So these things can come up, and it does protect it from, having to block as well. So if you don't get it in, or your creature can't attack on the first turn, just being able to block with this thing is still pretty good, because if you choose to block a green or a white creature, it's just not taking any damage and it's not dying. So that's still pretty good. So you can still get back into like swinging with that creature next turn. It won't really die if you choose to block whatever you want to block, as long as it's white or green. So I definitely think that this will see play in a lot of decks, especially if you're equipment focused, especially if you're blink focused and whatnot. But I just still think that it won't matter that much, that a lot of people really will run this in a Boros deck just to go get a land out of their library and whatnot, so that they can actually have some form of ramp and whatnot in their deck. Next up, Academy Manufacturer. 3/3/1. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. Okay, I don't know about this, but there's been a bit of buyout on feasting, troll canning, and whatnot. This is a bit weird. So there's all these cards that make foods, clues, and treasures and whatnot. So I think a lot of people want to make these food, clues, and treasures decks. This, I think, could go easily into Bruticlad style decks, because you can create lots of different tokens and whatnot. You can turn those tokens into like real game-winning threats and whatnot, things like that. So I think that this is a really good card that can see play in lots of different decks, whether you're just trying to live the dream of having all the food, clues, and treasures in the world, or whatnot, whatever you're trying to do, or just happen to be having all the tokens tribal or whatnot. I don't know. That seems kind of a bit janky, but it is kind of interesting and can certainly do some stuff. So I certainly think there is some build out there that can really take advantage of this. Whether this is more of a meme or a dream, I don't know, but I certainly think that this is still a good card, because even if you know that your deck does create one of these three things regularly, you just get the other two for free, which is pretty darn good. Yeah, sure, food isn't that relevant a lot of the time. Gaining life isn't that relevant a lot of the time, but suddenly when you're at 4 or 5 life and 10 life or less or whatnot, you're suddenly like, okay, I'm just going to crack some of these food, because apparently I need some life. Like suddenly it's worth it to start cracking them or do something with them. You can still do other things with them, like animate them and do other things. So there certainly is a definite archetype that you can go down with this sort of a card, and I certainly think it provides enough value for decks to want to run it. Next up, Nettle Cast. 3 mana equipment, equips for 2, it has living weapon. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment that you control. Look, you're either going to be artifacts or you're going to be enchantments for the most part, and most of your artifacts, if you're an artifact deck, are going to be equipments. So I don't really see this being in an enchantment deck, because it's an artifact itself. Like, sure, maybe if you have maybe 1 or 2 enchantments, like things that say you can auto-equip this thing for free or whatnot, things like that, yeah, sure, those will be your 1 or 2 ofs for the most part. But again, the 98% of your deck is going to be, these artifacts that equip and creatures to equip them to and whatnot. So, I think that certainly we'll see play in certain decks that care about equipment and, equipping their things with, very powerful equipment and having lots of them on the battlefield, so that they can punch in and do a lot of damage. Maybe Voltron decks, because most of these equipment decks, for the most part, tend to sort of just divulge into being Voltron anyway. So I would just lean more into that and be like, okay, I'm going to get in with my one dude, and that's all I need to do, and he gets +1/+1 for all the artifacts in the world that I have. So they don't even need to be equipped, which is pretty darn good. So that helps it out quite a bit in that regard. So next, Soul Talisman. It's a suspend soul ring. You suspend it for 3 turns. I have been sitting around talking to a lot of people, debating this card, trying to figure out how good or how bad it is, whatnot, this sort of thing. I don't know whether I've come to a conclusion on this. If you can cheat it out into play, I think it's really quite good. I think it can see a lot of play in decks that can cheat it out. If you're really hard up and really want to play something like this, something that's essentially another Worn Power Stone. So yeah, if you want to play another Worn Power Stone, essentially, maybe this is okay. I don't know. Maybe if you want to take out your Temple of the False God and actually put this in, maybe that's better, because a lot of people just run Temple of the False God as a quote-unquote mana crypt. Essentially, it's another ramp spell in their deck, sort of. So I would know whether that's the right thing to do, because some people have done that where they've taken out Temple of the False God and put in Worn Power Stone over it, because it's active way more, and yeah, sure, it costs 3, but at least you can use it pretty much the next turn, rather than having to go, oh cool, I still haven't hit my 4th land, go me, and whatnot. But still, I have really been thinking about this, and it's just very hard to go, yes, it's good, put it in this style of deck. Certainly if you're in an Osgear sort of style of deck, or a style of deck that really wants to put things into the graveyard and put them to the battlefield from the graveyard and whatnot, those sorts of decks, then I think it certainly can be good. So it certainly has some place in some decks, but how many decks that is and what those decks actually look like, I don't know. But this certainly is a decent card that can go in some decks. It's just not as good as what Soul Ring is, and I don't even know whether it's as good as what Worn Power Stone is. So at least it taps straight away, I guess. So there's that. But anyway, last couple cards here I want to go quickly over. Liquid Metal Torque, just another 2 mana rock. It also taps to make a target non-land permanent an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. Yeah, sure, whatever. There's some things that you certainly can do with that, like they do that with Khan and whatnot, so that they can turn somebody's land into an artifact, and then they can wasteland them with Khan by making it into a creature with CMC equal to its cost and whatnot. So that that's just another gross thing that I'm sure some people will do. But mostly it's just another 2 mana rock with some other upside or whatever. And I think you would run a 2 mana rock, and that other upside, yeah, sure, that's not great. But then again, it's sort of hard because there's a lot of 2 mana rocks nowadays. And it's sort of well, does this crack the top 10 mana rocks that I would run? And that's kind of hard to say yes, it would. But it does depend on what your deck is. If your deck is not very synergistic to any one strategy or whatnot, like equipment or enchantments or whatnot, I would certainly think about running something like this, maybe if it cracks your top 10. But there certainly are a lot of mana rocks out there, so you might be hard up on trying to put this in somewhere. But again, it's still pretty good. Ornithopter of Paradise, same sort of thing. 2 mana, 0/2 flyer, taps to add a mana of any color. Look, this again, maybe these go in colorless decks, these both last 2 cards. Maybe the same with Soul Talisman, but again, I'm not sure. But again, still, I think this is pretty good. 2 mana for a mana dork isn't the best rate. It's not the worst rate either, but still, it's not the best rate. But still, it's you think about it being a 2-mana mana rock. Okay, it's a 2-mana mana rock. I just can't activate it the turn it comes into play, which sometimes you can't anyway because, you don't have anything for 1 mana or whatever. So it's just like, oh, okay, this doesn't do anything anyway because I haven't got anything for 1 mana. But later on, it's much more effective and can do a lot more stuff. So certainly it can go in an artifact deck as well, especially, those decks that care about artifact creatures, especially if you can suit this thing up late game with some other, equipment and whatnot. This thing can get in there and do other things, or you can sacrifice it to recur it and do other things like that. So there certainly are other synergies that I would certainly think about. But after all of that, we are pretty much done here with our review of the set from Modern Horizons 2. There we go. We've done it. And in quicker time than the Command Zone podcast. So there we go. I know it's not to the same quality or whatnot, but still, we've got our stuff out quicker than what they have. So there you go. Yes, one last video, as I said, will be sort of quote-unquote in the series, but it's not in the series, I guess. I still don't really count the legendary video in the series, but it's in the series as well, so it's a little weird. But these are more set reviews these are all for the new cards and whatnot, whereas that video will be for the reprints. So I want to start talking about the reprints and whatnot that they put into the sets and whatnot, because they're often relevant, and I really haven't done them before. So people want to know about that stuff, and I want to bring them the content because, that's what content creators do. But anyway, let me know what you think about this, or write your stuff down there in the comments below, and hope to see you in the next one. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today. And if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.